Does the world end? Nuclear war? A deadly plague? Falling asteroids? Probably not. Most experts agree that the most likely way for the world to be destroyed is by accident, a mistake. And today, we're looking at the ultra-secret underground market that deals in exploiting those mistakes. A market where hackers in their basement make millions of dollars from terrorists, dictators, and even your own government. But as we venture into this dark underground world, we'll also be asking how it affects you. Have you ever wondered if you're being watched through your webcam or phone camera? Or if your password-protected files and messages are really as private as they seem? As our lives become more and more connected by technology, have you ever stopped to think of the risks? I will warn you now, your life will probably be better if you don't watch this video. Sometimes ignorance is bliss, and you'll be happier not knowing. Because once we open this vault, there's no going back. I hardly ever updated my computer. I used to hit the remind me later button over and over until eventually whoever was telling me I needed to update just gave me no choice and ran the update anyway. I'd always think, why do we need so many updates? What's even changing? If you can relate, then by the end of this video, I guarantee you'll have changed your mind about postponing updates. But let's start at the beginning. There are all kinds of secret black markets. From drugs, to organs, to weapons, there will always be illegal trades happening in the shadows. But one of the most disturbing and secretive markets is the buying and selling of zero-day exploits. Which raises our first question. What the hell is that? A zero-day, sometimes pronounced O-day, is essentially a flaw in either software or hardware for which there is no existing patch or fix. It's called a zero-day because the original developer has had 0 days to come up with a defense. They have no idea it's even there. And until the vendor learns about it and provides an update to fix it, anyone using that software or hardware is vulnerable. That's why 0 days are the most powerful tool to any hacker. It can be a backdoor into any system in the world. For example, a 0 day in Apple's iOS could allow someone to remotely break into any iPhone in the world and see every file, app, photo, and message, completely undetected. And there is no protection against the 0 day exploit. By definition, it's an unknown vulnerability, so no antivirus will help you. Of course, eventually, the manufacturer finds the security hole and releases a security update. But it could be months or years before they detect it, which means a catastrophic amount of damage can be done before then. With the right 0 day exploits, a hacker could break into any company or system in the world. And that doesn't just mean your devices. They could break into a military base, or the safety controls at a chemical plant, or even shut down a nation's electricity grid. Given how powerful these 0 day exploits can be, they are of course incredibly lucrative. The right buyer will pay millions of dollars. But as for who is buying these 0 day exploits, well, that's an even more disturbing question. It all started in the 80s and 90s when hackers would find bugs in various software. This was often just a hobby. They were curious to see how the code worked and if they could find any vulnerabilities in it. If they found a mistake in the code, they would often approach these tech companies like Microsoft or Oracle and let them know they found a vulnerability. But these tech companies were not remotely grateful. It was the opposite. They viewed these hackers as a nuisance, as criminals. They certainly didn't want people drawing attention to flaws in their products, and so they would tell hackers to stop poking around their software or else they'd take legal action. This reaction from tech companies caused a lot of frustration amongst hackers who were trying to do the right thing by notifying the companies of flaws in their code. So the threats from the tech companies caused a lot of resentment, which would ultimately convert many white hat hackers to black hat. And so when the companies didn't listen to them, some hackers just started sharing the bugs they found publicly online, like on a service called BugTrack. Microsoft then compared them to terrorists. So in 2003, a security company called iDefense sensed an opportunity. They started offering to pay hackers directly for vulnerabilities they found. It was often quite small amounts, maybe $100, but this gave hackers an incentive to share the bugs they found in an ethical way. Because iDefense would then share these bugs with the vendors so they could get fixed, but in the meantime, they could offer their own clients a workaround to protect themselves until the vendor fixed the bug. So iDefense's business model actually worked quite well for everyone. But this gave birth to the zero-day market, where these zero-day vulnerabilities could be sold for a profit. And it wasn't long before iDefense started getting outbid. Government agency contractors and their intermediaries started reaching out to hackers on these forums and offering to pay way higher prices. It could be tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars for the right exploit. Of course, there was one critical condition: complete silence. A zero-day is only worth so much if nobody else knows about it, as obviously as soon as the vendor fixes the security hole, the hacker loses access. So if government spies and brokers were going to shell out 6 figures for a zero-day exploit, it was crucial nobody else knew about it. The first rule of the zero-day market is you do not talk about the zero-day market. iDefense started to notice bug submissions began to drop, and some hackers started suggesting they had better options. However, since these transactions were typically done through brokers, hackers would usually have no idea who they were selling to or how the zero-day would be used. You're just dealing with a middleman. You may hope the exploit you found is being sold to your own government, who will use it to spy on terrorists and prevent harm. But in reality, it could be sold to a rogue nation state who may use it to trigger an explosion at a chemical plant and kill civilians. You have no way of knowing. That's why the zero-day sellers have been referred to as merchants of death, selling the bullets for cyber war. We know from Edward Snowden's leaks that the United States was one of the biggest players in the zero-day market. The leaked documents suggested the NSA had acquired a vast library of invisible backdoors into basically every app, server, and system you could think of, and they could break in even if a device was turned off. But essentially every country in the world is now active in the zero-day market. Initially, the main reason for hoarding these exploits was because they're the best tool for espionage. But now that we use the same software in factories, nuclear plants, power grids, and pipelines, these zero-day exploits became a new tool for cyber war. Of course, the exact same zero days that could be used against your enemies can be used against you, as most of the world is all using the same technology. And tech companies have embraced the mantra of move fast and break things. But this means as more code is hastily written, more bugs appear that can be exploited. Interestingly, tech companies have now changed their tune towards hackers. And instead of viewing them as the enemy, they've realized they're a cheap form of quality assurance. So many companies now offer their own bug bounty programs to pay hackers for finding vulnerabilities in their code. The problem is, zero-day brokers pay significantly more money, so companies are basically trusting hackers who find a bug will accept less money by giving it directly to the vendor so they can fix it, rather than selling to a zero-day broker. As an example, there is a zero-day broker who actually shares their price list publicly called Zerodium. Most brokers are very secretive about who they sell to and for how much. But Zerodium is transparent that they pay between $2 and $2.5 million for a zero-day for Android or iOS that can access a user's device fully. This is the holy grail of zero days, as it can get you into almost any device without the user even needing to click anything. So, as you can now see, there is a thriving market for zero-day exploits, as they can essentially be cyber weapons of mass destruction. and you can imagine the damage they could inflict. Except, we don't need to imagine, it's already happened. It's 2010 at the headquarters of Iran's nuclear program, where they're developing nuclear weapons. Little do they know, they've been infected with a malicious computer worm, which is the most sophisticated cyber weapon the world has ever seen. It was called Stuxnet, and the attack used 4 zero-day exploits strung together. The attack began when an infected USB flash drive was plugged into a computer running Microsoft Windows. By exploiting a Microsoft zero-day vulnerability, Stuxnet was able to spread from the infected USB drive onto the computer without detection. Then, using a separate zero-day vulnerability in printers, Stuxnet was able to gain access to the facility's local network and spread across the entire plant. Even though the network wasn't connected to the internet, by exploiting these zero-day vulnerabilities, Stuxnet could burrow itself deep into their systems until it found its target. And then, Stuxnet began overloading Iran's spinning uranium centrifuges out of control, causing them to overheat and self-destruct. This computer worm was causing very real physical damage. And yet, the code was so cleverly constructed that it reported on the monitors that the centrifuges were rotating at their normal speed. And thus, to the Iranian scientists monitoring the computer screens, everything appeared normal. By the time they finally realized a computer worm was responsible for the destruction of their centrifuges, around 1/5 of them had already been destroyed by Stuxnet. Whilst nobody ever officially confirmed responsibility for the attack, it would later be concluded by experts that Stuxnet was a joint operation between the United States and Israel. And it's estimated it set Iran's nuclear program back several years. However, the other consequences of Stuxnet cannot be overstated. This was the world's first cyber weapon of mass destruction. A former NSA director compared it to the moment the first atomic bomb was used. A new weapon was now out there, and there was no going back. It showed other countries what could be achieved with a few zero days used together. It was almost an advert for the damage and destruction that could be caused with these cyber weapons. And so, after Stuxnet's discovery in 2010, the zero-day market became flooded with more buyers, including countries with terrible human rights records. The cyber arms race was on. It's May 12th, 2017, and panic has erupted in London. Patients are being turned away from hospitals, being told their surgeries can't go ahead. They're told that the British health system has been hacked. More specifically, many hospitals in the UK had been infected with ransomware called WannaCry. When staff opened their computers, they saw a message telling them all of their files had been encrypted. The ransom note said, "Maybe you were busy looking for a way to recover your files, but do not waste your time. Nobody can recover your files without our decryption service." And of course for that, you had to pay. A Bitcoin address was provided. There was also a timer of how long until the price increased, and if they didn't pay within a week, their important files would be lost forever. It quickly became clear this ransomware had spread all over the world at a shockingly fast speed. From Indian airlines, Chinese universities, Japanese police, to Spain's largest telecom service, hundreds of thousands of computers were encrypted with WannaCry. But here's the crucial part. Experts soon discovered why the attacks had spread so quickly. The attackers had used a stolen NSA exploit called Eternal Blue. This just demonstrated the risk of governments hoarding these zero-day vulnerabilities, and how these exploits can fall into the wrong hands and cause untold damage. In this case, the attack was traced back to the Lazarus Group, a hacker group connected to the government of North Korea. What's fascinating about ransomware is that it is a business. There are countless reports of people haggling over the price with these attackers, and some ransomware teams even offer customer service. Ultimately, their objective is to make money. And fortunately in this case, the attackers had been sloppy. They had unwittingly included a kill switch in their code, and a 22-year-old college dropout called Marcus Hutchins quickly discovered it. He realized that the WannaCry malware only executed if it couldn't connect to the kill switch domain name, which was a long string of characters. So he simply registered that domain name for $11, and because the malware could now connect to the domain, it stopped executing on new devices. Whilst it's estimated WannaCry caused up to $4 billion in damages, things could have been so much worse. And just a month later, they would be. On June 27th, 2017, Russia used this new leaked NSA cyber weapon in Ukraine, in what became the most destructive cyber attack in history. Ukrainians woke up to see black screens everywhere. They couldn't buy groceries, couldn't get money out at ATMs, couldn't get paid, and they couldn't even monitor radiation levels at Chernobyl, so they had no idea if they were safe. This single attack from Russia is estimated to have cost over $10 billion. But Russia was so deeply inside all of Ukraine's systems that they could have easily used that power for something very deadly. But instead, they were trying to send a message to Ukrainians that their government was weak and Russia was stronger and in control. They had actually done something similar 2 years earlier using a different exploit, when the Russians briefly shut off the power grid in Ukraine, plunging the country into darkness and panic. What's fascinating about these cyber attacks is that one of the reasons things weren't much worse for Ukraine is that at the time, not everything was as interconnected and automated in the country. Whereas, if you contrast that with a country like the United States, virtually everything is connected to the internet. And thus, experts have warned that as we continue to connect more devices, from our hospitals to chemical plants to pipelines to cars to light bulbs and fridges, we are essentially creating the world's largest attack surface. You may think these incidents would be more of a wake-up call. We've had one country remotely destroying another country's nuclear program. We've had hackers encrypt files around the world costing billions of dollars. We've even had a country shut off the power in another country. But the news cycle moves on, exploits continue to be hoarded, and the secretive zero-day market continues to thrive.